welcome to a special bonus episode of Dogs in Our World. I'm Adam Winston. A few of you tell me that you enjoy listening to podcasts that have a more free-form and unedited style to their interviews. I've also been kind of looking for a way to give you a little more insight into me and my background. So this recent interview that I did with a show based in Canada, I think it was a great opportunity for me to talk about the incredible experiences I've had in my life and what led to the creation of Dogs in Our World. So this bonus episode is basically an episode of another show that had me on as a guest, if that makes sense. I'll tell you more about it in a second. All right, here we go.
You are listening to Dogs in Our World, a show that explores the history, science, and importance of the domestic dog. Here's your host, Adam Winston.
The Furbearers is an animal advocacy group based in Canada. They've been around since 1953 and are based in Vancouver, British Columbia. The group also has a podcast called Defender Radio, hosted by Michael Howie, and he's out of the Toronto, Ontario area. I was completely honored to be a guest on their show and have the opportunity to basically talk about my journey that was Dogs in Our World. And I'll warn you, I talked a lot on their show. like I talked a lot. So listen to this at your own risk. All right. He doesn't edit much. And now I might have a special message at the end, but I decided to offer you yet another bonus in addition to this bonus episode by not cutting in. I'm not going to cut in with any commercial breaks or anything. All right. Cool. Now, of course, if you are listening to this and you do have a business or a project that you would like to hear a commercial break for, then let me know over at dogsinOurworld.com. All right. Let's cut right into my interview on the Defender Radio podcast hosted by Michael Howie.
How did you become a dog person? I think that's like the best place to start. Because, looking at your history, it's not an obvious, oh yeah, he's going to be a dog guy. So how did you get sort of from where you were growing up, and I know you were in the military, to being a person with an interest in dogs and dog training and so on?
Yeah, it was something that I never really saw myself doing. I guess the seed was first planted back in 2006-ish, 2007. After getting out of the Air Force, I was a tour manager for rock bands for about 4 or 5 years. That led into managing venues, and I lived and worked in a gigantic music venue that was on the Great Salt Lake in Utah. And when there wasn't an event or a concert or a show, I was the only person for miles. And so I asked my boss, I was like, man, it's kind of lonely out here. It's kind of sketchy here at night. We'd already been broken in once. And he goes, well, I'll tell you what, man, after the next show, go ahead and go get yourself a dog. I'll pay for it. I'm like, all right, great. So
that's a nice job perk.
So I went to the pound and I came back with a 1-year-old male feral chow chow. I mean, I use the word feral loosely, but I'm pretty sure I was his first human. They think he was living up in the mountains the first year of his life, and they caught him coming down, and animal control picked him up. So I come back to the venue with this, chow, and my boss was thinking I was going to go get like a golden retriever or a lab or something. It's like, what did you do? And the dog ended up actually being one of the greatest, if not the greatest dog I've ever known. He was incredibly special. He was very well balanced. He could, for a chow with limited, socialization, we could walk through a sold out concert. We could walk through a sold out Slayer show or hip hop show. And he would just stay right by my side and never got nervous, never got anxious. People could run up to him and pet him and touch him, and he just didn't care. He was just the coolest dog ever. And I had never, my family wasn't a pet family. We didn't have dogs or cats or anything growing up. My grandmother in Alaska had a couple little dogs.
But Rhye, we named him Rhye. He was the music venue Rhye, the concert Rhye.
I get that in a second.
He just completely it just blew my mind. I'd never had a relationship with an animal before. And I didn't know the possibilities, and what this dog taught me about patience and impulse control and just caring for another life, and the companionship that dog gave me when we were out there. It was just he and I, many nights it was just he and I, and we were the only life forms for miles pretty much other than the wildlife. And I had to move to Philadelphia. I got a job offer for another music venue, and I wanted to get back to the East Coast where my family lived. And I just couldn't take this chow who had been living basically on a state park for all of his life to like inner city Philadelphia. He had a cat addiction. And in Philly, there's a cat under every car. And so the guys at the music venue and one of his friends who was a sound guy at one of the clubs, they had pretty much adopted him, and I basically, they adopted him from me, and it stuck with me. I didn't realize how close we were, and I mean, I would have nightmares, I would have dreams, and it was just crazy. I felt like I lost someone, and that's what got me interested in dogs. And so now I'm in Philly. Totally different environment, totally different place, totally different culture. And, the one thing that's constant in this world is dogs. It doesn't matter what country you're in or what language people are speaking. All dogs speak the same language. And so, I had this emptiness without having a dog in my home after experiencing Rhye. And so in Philly, I just kind of started helping my friends, and, the local bartender, was working double shifts. And she really needed to get the dog out of the house that she just adopted. And so every Thursday I'd go over and get the dog out of the house and hang out. And that led to another dog. And before I knew it, I was kind of like the neighborhood dog guy, whether it was dog sitting or dog walking, or, hey, people would give me their key to their house. Hey, could you run over to my house, take my dog to the dog park? I'll be back in like 3 hours or whatever. And so I just basically hung out with all the dogs in the neighborhood. And so instead of just having one Rhye, I got to know lots of different kinds of dogs. And so that just, the spark that Rhye lit was just kind of became a passion, not really a passion about dogs, but a passion for learning about dogs.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'm always saying in my podcast, Dogs in Our World, available on iTunes, is that, the more I learn about dogs, the more I realize I don't know, and the more I want to know. And whether it's I'm learning about dogs and philosophy or law or whatever, it just opens these doors where it's like, man, I never even thought about that. My philosophy and my perspectives are always kind of evolving and growing. And I don't know. I mean, I honestly think that my interest and passion for learning about dogs has almost become a bit of a fixation for myself. But that's why the podcast has kind of just given me an outlet. I just had these things in my head that I wanted to share, and I wanted people to kind of know about the stuff I was learning, because I thought the stuff that I've been learning about is valuable. But anyways, so Philly, and then, after being kind of the neighborhood dog guy in Philadelphia, I used the GI Bill to go to school in my last few years in Philadelphia. And, I was going to taking a lot of business classes, studying business entrepreneurship and stuff. And so every single class, just about every class, you would have to come up with some sort of business plan or marketing plan, or come up with some sort of mock business that you and the classmates would flush out or whatever. And I don't know. I mean, I'm in my 30s, doing my undergrad. So I've already got some writing skills and some life experience. And so I just wanted to write about something fun. It's like, if I have to make up a fake business, then I don't know what kind of fake business would be fun to write about and figure out. So I just started doing like dog related businesses, and that just kind of made me just look at the business side of the dog industry and the pet industry and things like that. And then, as I was finishing up school, they talk to you, they ask you, what do you want to do? What are you going to do after this? Like, what do you want to pursue? And so many people around me, they wanted to do things that I just didn't see myself wanting to do in 20, 30, 40 years. And, they wanted to create an app that would change the world, or, go work at Comcast, or, get their promotion at whatever job they already have. And I'm thinking about this at home while I'm doing homework, and I've got, a neighbor's dog on my lap. And I'm thinking, man, if there's one thing I can see myself doing in 20 years, it would just be hanging out with this dog. Like, that would just be fun, or hanging out with a dog. And so I thought, well, then what do I really want to do? I thought, well, I want to figure out a way to make money or become a professional that gets to be around dogs, like, how do I do that? And so I thought, I need education. I need experience. I have to catch up with all of these people that have had dogs in their lives all their life. I'm a little bit behind the curve here. So what do I need? I need education. I need experience. And I need to create some value. So maybe people would want to hire me to have, to work around dogs. And where do I want to be? And my family bounced around a lot. I was originally from Alaska. Family moved to Virginia, back to Seattle, back to Virginia. And I thought, man, not only do I want to work around dogs, but I want to work around dogs back in the Pacific Northwest. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to completely change my life. I'm going to just do this graduation, in June. And then I'm going to get on a plane and I'm just going to go to Seattle and I'm just going to set up shop and I'm going to get education. And I looked up University of Washington and they had a program in applied animal behavior. Dr. Jim Ha and his wife Rhye Ha created the program over at University of Washington, and you can learn a little bit more about it in my most recent episode, Dogs and Science. And so I got enrolled in that program. It was a 1-year academic program, kind of like more like a professional certificate in applied animal behavior, mostly focusing on domestic animals, dogs, cats, things like that. And then I was like, all right, now I got to get a job. I got to work with dogs. And so the first thing I could find and think of was going to Petco and becoming a dog trainer. So I signed up for that. And then that led to finally having an opportunity to get hired part-time by the local county animal shelter, which is quite an experience working in an animal shelter that has an open door policy. And I commend anyone who does that, and I thank anyone who does that for their community. It's such a necessary job that is often goes unseen and unpraised. And so now, and then here I am. And as I was learning all this stuff, I was really just crash course, just living, eating, and breathing dogs and knowledge and canine science, and animal behavior science. And I just was learning all of this incredible stuff that was just blowing my mind, and not just making me learn about dogs, but I was learning about people. Through learning about dogs, I was learning about people. I don't even have time to get and explain what I'm talking about. Listen to my philosophy episode, listen to my law episode. Learning about dogs taught me about slave law.
Yeah.
Learning about dogs taught me about Descartes and what he thought about animals. And is it possible that what he thought about animals had any influence on how we think about animals today? And in my philosophy episode, he talks about, if we can say that we know that there are pit bulls that are very calm and affectionate and loving and very sweet and don't ever get upset. And we know that there are, basset hounds that can be very emotional and reactive and get upset. Mm-hmm. And so, what I'm trying to say is that you can have a beagle that acts like a golden retriever, and you can have a black lab that acts like a husky. And so when people start generalizing breeds, he taught this philosopher that I interviewed, taught me how to think about breeds almost as we think about human race. Every person is unique. Every person comes with their own story and their own experience and their own personality. And so we have to be careful about how we generalize. And I don't mean to disrespect anyone or humans I'm not trying to compare animals and humans too closely, but I'm just saying learning about these animals has opened doors for me to think about things that I never have thought about before. And it's just, I feel enlightened.
And is that sort of how you got around then to the decision to do a podcast? Was as you're taking in all of this different information from different sources, was it finally saying, okay, I want to see if I can put this together? Or did you have sort of a plan of this 10 episode season ahead of time?
Everything was in my head. This whole series was in my head. And it was crazy. I was like, it's just, I guess the word would be cathartic when I finished this series, because I had this whole thing in my head. Now, there was a couple episodes I didn't get to. First of all, let's go back a little bit. When I was in the Air Force from 1997 to 2002, I was overseas the whole time because I had a job that was I was called a radio and television broadcast producer, or a radio and television broadcaster. I can't remember. Television and radio broadcast production, I think. Anyways, if you've ever seen the movie Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams, he was in the Air Force. Adrian Cronauer was his character, and Adrian Cronauer is a real guy, and he actually trained some of the people who trained me when I was first got in the Air Force. And so that introduced me to radio production. I would do the morning show in Iceland. I would do the afternoon rock show in Bosnia, or the morning show in Hungary, or Germany. And so, that was my crash course in kind of radio production and learning how to use a mic and editing. C.A.R.E, I think, was the very first software for audio edit, one of the first for audio editing. And keep in mind, this was 2002 when I got out of the Air Force. I was like, there's no way radio is going to be around. They got this thing called the internet now. Like there's radio is a dinosaur. I would call it the dinosaur. It's a dinosaur of an industry. Like I need to get out of radio. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to go anywhere. The internet's taking over. And then here we are, 15 years later. And I was like, man, I really want to share this information I'm learning about, but I want to do it in a way that's listenable, not just me ranting into a microphone. No one's going to want to listen to that. And I had these episodes in my head, like, man, I want to talk about this stuff I'm learning about, about the history of dogs and philosophy and law and all these things that I was looking for a podcast. Basically, I wanted to make a podcast that I wanted to listen to but couldn't find. I was like, if I have these radio skills and haven't been in radio in years, I was like, podcasts, like, that's perfect. I can dust off these old skills that I have, these 15-year-old skills, and just kind of adapt it for the new technology of the day, or podcasting. And I was like, this is a perfect blend, a perfect match. I finally get to use all of these, because I've had so many various awesome careers, everything from, flying in an F-16, backseat of an F-16 and doing morning shows in Iceland, to tour managing rock bands, to, moving to Philly and going to school. And I never thought that I would be able to combine all of my experiences into kind of one project. And that was Dogs in Our World. And yes, I had every episode in my head. I knew that it was going to be a lot of work to do it by myself, because I wasn't just going to sit in front of a mic and just kind of talk. I knew that I wasn't just going to cast a wide net and say, who wants to be on my show? Oh, I know about dog agility, I'll be on your show. I was like, no, I'm going to take people through a university. And so I actually looked up humanities topics, like if there was a college that just taught humanities, what would people learn about? Well, they learn about philosophy. They learn about, medicine or health or psychology and so I basically laid out these subjects, these school subjects, on a piece of paper: law, philosophy, sports, And then I said, okay, now I have to go find the person who is the ultimate expert on this subject. So I found the guy who wrote the book, What Philosophy Can Tell You About Your Dog. And I just started hammering him with emails and phone calls. I just tracked him down like a creep, And then,
I'm familiar with doing that.
And then, in leadership, all right, I want to learn. I enjoyed learning about leadership from the human aspect. What can dogs teach us about leadership? And how should we view leadership as a way to have a partnership with dogs? And I think that, I think many of us, especially in this country, have a very intense idea of what providing leadership is to dogs. It's because it's how we've been treated, up, down. I'm the boss, right? Mm-hmm. Do what I'd say now, and it's like, because we've been treated like that, it gives us a chance to now treat dogs like that sometimes. And so Julie Forbes, who actually hosts a radio show, and she really enjoys learning and teaching and talking about the subject of leadership. I was able to get her on my show, and Temple Grandin, right? And Temple Grandin, I didn't necessarily have an episode in my head that I knew I wanted to do, and I didn't really have. So I had a list of subjects, and then under the list of subjects was Temple Grandin. I had dream guests, right? Like, if there was one person I could actually meet in person, who would I want to talk to? And that was Temple Grandin. And I just lucked out. She was traveling for a completely different event that she was speaking on an island, on Vashon Island, which is just off of Seattle, just outside of Seattle on the Sound. And I basically just hounded her with emails and her staff, and I was just emailing the college that she works at, and she was able just to squeeze in an interview right before her public speaking or her speaking engagements. So I did have Temple Grandin as a person, not as a subject, but I had it in my head. You know, I wanted to learn. I wanted her to teach me more about the autism spectrum, and I know very little, but I knew very little about it. I'd never really sat down and really learned about it. And so she kind of introduced me to, you know, the autism spectrum and how we can think of it and look at it, and how can, you know, maybe dogs teach us a little bit about autism. You know, she talked about repetitive behaviors, which is something that I'm familiar with from learning about animal behavior and things like that. You know, a lion that paces in his enclosure in a zoo, you know, or the bear that, you know, shakes his head as, you know, nonstop. And she taught me that animals will have these stereoptic behaviors, engage in stereotypy. I always get that word wrong. Because they're understimulated. You know, they don't have enough enrichment. They don't have enough things to do. And so they revert to this repetitive behavior. And then people on the farther side on the autism spectrum will also engage in repetitive behaviors, as spinning or whatever it is. But that's because they're overstimulated. And she just helped me. She just kind of held my hand and said, okay, you know this stuff about dogs, and this is how, you know, you can think about these things with humans and autism. And it's just like, what an incredible experience. It wasn't just meeting someone famous. I wasn't just getting to have my picture taken with someone cool. I had someone who just sat down and taught me. So special. And I'm just so glad. I mean, in the end, I'm glad that these episodes, of course, I'm never really going to be completely happy with my show. It was my first podcast. There's a lot of room for improvement. You know, and I think each episode got a little bit better, but I'm just so happy I got to document these experiences, and I got to record these conversations that, if anything, I'm going to listen to for a long time. And every time I listen to the interviews, I actually still learn a little something new. And thankfully, I still have a lot of parts of the interviews that I didn't even get to use in my episodes that I hope to get out to people too.
Well, and that was something I wanted to ask you about, was the format that you use is the more what I would consider documentarian or NPR style. Listeners to this show know I just record the interview and put it up. I'll do minor editing.
No, I'm too self-conscious, and I have low self-esteem. So, like, every single word that I put in my show is on paper before I record.
Oh no, and that was my my early stuff. When I look at that,
yeah,
I redubbed my questions.
Yeah.
So they would be more clear and concise. And the show evolved for me.
Oh, you like redubbed them? Like you would ask the question after the interview and then plug it into the...
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So like right now, you know, trying to think of how do I phrase this and so on and so forth. Now I just, you know, I had to go back and have a very written out version of it and put it in again.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Now this is the interview. But there's nothing right or wrong about either style. It's entirely preferential. And you'll hear some podcasts that do this and some podcasts that do the more NPR style. Was that what it was? Just wanting to
Well, it's from my training. It's from the Air Force training. So the Air Force trained us to do, you know, what's called ENG style. So electronic news gathering. So, you know, you're in Bosnia and you're living in what used to be a landmine field. And you know, you want to you want to very carefully walk to where you have to go record a story or who you have to interview, and you want to get it done fast and get it back into the studio so you can start editing, and then you got to get it up to the network. We actually had American Forces Network, which was a global radio and television satellite network. You know, depending on what country you're in, depending on what feed you get. Or, you know, you'd have to go into a training exercise where you're sitting. I was literally sitting on top of a tank turret as it was driving full speed over, and I'm holding onto an antenna, and I got a camera over my shoulder, you know, and I've got to get these shots, get it back in the studio, get it back up to headquarters. And so I was trained in like the very traditional radio news style. You know, you interview someone, you come back, you write a 2 to 3 to 5 page script. You plug in a soundbite. It's like, we're out here on the training field. And then you get a soundbite of some soldier. Yeah, it's real loud out here. And then you cut back to me in the studio. And yeah, they worked real hard. And hoorah, USA. And then you cut back to them. Bam, 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 firing the thing. And so I kind of adapted that style. And kind of what I did is I took that kind of ENG, old school news, radio news style. And I just kind of elongated it. And kind of stretched it, made it a little bit longer. The soundbite's a little bit longer. And my narration is a little bit longer. And so instead of kind of making a 2-minute radio story, I kind of have like a 45-minute discussion where I'm cutting into sound bites. I'm kind of cutting back into me for exposition and then cutting back. I mean, I feel like, I also knew that if I was going to make this podcast, like I said, I wanted it to be listenable. I think people get tired very quickly when they're listening. Their ears get tired, especially in today's age where there's so much selection and everything that you watch. I mean, think about how many shots are in a TV commercial. It's fast. There are a lot. Many podcasts that I listen to, if it's just a guy just talking into the microphone, or if it's just two guys kind of bantering and just kind of not very focused, I lose focus and I lose interest and I find something else. So I wanted my show to kind of be tight. I wanted it to kind of have a radio feel, kind of like a produced feel, but still smooth in a way where you can come in and out of my interview and my narration without it being jarring. I'm sure the first few episodes probably were, but that's, and so I was very serious about the format of the show. I mean, like I said, I had everything on paper, even before I found the guests. And I just, also because the podcast is so much work, I didn't want to commit myself to it like in perpetuity or forever. I didn't want to like, all right, this is going to be something I do every week or every month forever. And then one day it stops and nobody knows why. So I always like having an end game or an exit strategy in pretty much anything I do, whether I'm living somewhere or working somewhere, it's like, all right, I'm going to do this for 1 year and then I'm going to reassess, and the same thing with the podcast. It's like, all right, I'm going to do 10 to 12 episodes, make a season, step back from it, take a little breath, think about it, and then, make the next one even better if I do another season. Which if I do another season, I don't know. I think a lot of that would have to kind of revolve around if I can find sponsors or something, because I just literally cannot afford to keep doing this show. It's just like I'm renting a cabin on an island so I can basically ambush Temple Grandin on her way to a speaking engagement, like it's not very feasible, this show I'm doing, traveling out, driving out to Olympia to talk to a therapist, to record an interview with someone who does dog therapy. It's just like, I don't know. It would have been so much more cost effective if I did want to do if I could just get over my my issues and just do a show where I do just talking to a mic or just talk to a friend about my favorite movie. But, that's not what I had in my head. That's not what I wanted to share with the public, unfortunately.
Well, and there's two insights there for me. One is you can look at remote, what we're doing. There are ups and downs to it, and it can be a horrible, horrible headache at times, and create all kinds of different issues. The other thing that I find very interesting is how your history as a communicator didn't dictate, but helped you form your show. And I look at sort of my background, which is print journalism. So it was, I think a print journalism news story is very similar in structure to what you would end up
That's
with.
one of the reasons why I like your show. I was actually listening to an episode not long ago, and I kind of had this, your delivery is so great, your voice is so great. And sometimes when I listen to some of your episodes, maybe at the beginning too, I just kind of feel like someone's just kind of like you're reading the paper to me, or like grandpa's kind of telling me the story of the day. It's like, hey boys, I just read here that, I was like, oh, what's going on?
I think you're actually older than me. So the whole grandpa thing, we're going to have a talk about that later. Now let's talk about the show though. I've listened to all the episodes. I think I listened to the first 4, just casually listening. And then I went
So you listen to the
rest.
worst ones. You listen to the worst sounding ones. Thank you.
I actually went back and found your raw edits on the internet and just listened to those. So the first one I really enjoyed, and what was interesting to me is you are a dog trainer doing a show about dogs, and your first episode was about wolves, which it makes sense, but is still very, very amusing to me. What was the reasoning for you to start with wolves for your dog show?
I love that question. And can I just say again how much I appreciate you interviewing me, because this whole show is me recording what other people had to say. And I love talking about dogs so much. And like, it's so honestly rare that someone says, hey, you want to talk about dogs? And so so let me know if I get a little out of control. But your question, your question was, you're a dog trainer and you got this podcast, you're working hard on it. Why would your first show be about wolves? And essentially, why would I not do a show about dog training? Well, first of all, like I said, I had this passion for learning about the stuff I was learning, and these kind of doors were being opened in my brain that I just never even considered. And iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher and all this podcast, wherever you can find a library of podcasts, there are a gazillion dog training podcasts. If you type dogs, into iTunes and any dog related show is usually going to be about dog training, or let me help you with your pet, and I'm not looking to compete with all of those thousands of podcasts. And I figured that there's plenty of great podcasts. Fernando out of New Jersey, he has this really wonderful, very tight, brief podcast where he puts out lots of episodes about dog training, and he's a great guy. And I'm probably not going to make a better dog training podcast than him. But what I was looking for was a podcast where I could really learn about history, learn about the philosophy, law, leadership, sport, and all this stuff. And those podcasts didn't exist. Now, Julie Forbes does have a wonderful podcast called The Dog Show with Julie Forbes, I believe it's called. But, and it's a wonderful radio program that's broadcast here in the Puget Sound area. And so she does have kind of the podcast I was looking for, but it was basically a radio show that was recorded and then uploaded as a podcast. And I really wanted to do kind of like the show that I did. One thing that I definitely encountered as I was really gung-ho and hardcore learning about dogs and canine science and things like this was that there's some real heavy debates out there. There's a lot of people who disagree very heavily with other people. And I saw it as kind of a problem. I didn't like the fact that there were such hardcore, emotional, I don't even know the words to describe that these debates that people are having. And nearly all of these debates that people have, how we should view dogs, how we should provide leadership with dogs, what kind of relationship should dogs have with people. A lot of these debates, people will talk about wolves. Well, this is how wolves do it in the wild, so this is how we should, this is how we should view the dogs, and the whole idea of alpha, right? There's some people that say no, alpha, they need to know who's boss. You gotta be in charge. They gotta know who's in charge. And then there's the other side of the house says it's not about alpha. Alpha isn't even a thing. And by the way, your beagle is not a wolf. And I think and there's also a lot of egos, to be honest, with dog people, dog trainers. I heard someone say the other day, there's only one thing. What'd he say? He said, there's only one thing that two dog trainers can agree on, and that's that the third dog trainer is wrong, or something like that, And it limits us from learning. It limits us. It makes people not want to listen when they find that the person they're listening to has a different philosophy. And really, a lot of it is just language. But anyways, I said, okay, if I'm going to start this story, if I'm going to start this journey, this year-long journey of learning from the greatest people in the world that know about these subjects, then I got to start at the beginning. All right. Because I want people to know that, I want people to know kind of where I stand, on this issues, and the issues were going to be unavoidable. In fact, I had to tell many of my guests, hey, just so you know, I've already covered the alpha thing. Okay. I got that out of the way in the first episode. I actually went and met wolves. Okay. I talked to a guy who knows more about you or more about wolves than you. So let's just move on from that. And people still wanted to bring it up, because it's just it's something that people are so passionate about. And I think a lot of it too is just that in the last few years, we've discovered a lot more that we didn't know, whether it be genetics or just in the science of behavior. We know a lot more. And so there's the people that are just very passionate about kind of getting these new ideas, or correcting old ideas. And so I said to myself, okay, I need to go to the source and who can help me, someone who can just kind of help me start on a nice neutral platform to get this story going, to get this journey going. And so I said, I'm going to have to find wolves, and I'm going to have to find someone who can teach me about wolves, and who can also not only teach me about wolves, but also has some experience with dogs. And because I was just exhausted with having dog people try to tell me about wolves. Some guy at a dog park, it's like some IT guy at a dog park with his super well-balanced, very calm, awesome dog. And he's like, oh no, well, wolves, and I'm like, or people trying to tell me that, you need to be more of an alpha. Like, I've been told you need to be more of an alpha. And it's like, what does that mean? What does that mean? I don't know what that means. What does it mean to be an alpha? Because everybody seems to have their own idea. And so I found a sanctuary. I think it was one of my classmates from University of Washington, because remember, I'd only been here a year or so. I moved here right before I started the podcast. They said, hey, there's this place called Wolf Haven International. It's about 45 minutes, an hour away. And they actually have wolves, wolf dog hybrids, coyotes. They even have Mexican red wolves there, and they're like, "That's where you need to go." And I was like, "All right." So I just emailed the sanctuary, and Eric Wilbur was just so incredibly gracious. I'd never done a podcast episode before, so I'm trying to tell these people, let me hang out with your wolves. I have a podcast, but I don't have any episodes. No, you've never heard of me. No, you can't really find my show anywhere because it doesn't exist. But can I come do And Eric was like, I know he was hesitant. I'm sure he was hesitant at first. But he did. He basically let me have a private tour. He opened the sanctuary for me. He didn't open it for me, but it wasn't open to the public when I was there. And
yes.
Again, can you imagine a more incredible experience for a guy like me that wants to learn? And so this guy, Eric, he sat me down and he said, and we went through the debates that people have and the things people say. And he said a lot of the same stuff that other people were trying to tell me. And he kind of solidified my stance on the whole debate. And I just got it out of the way. I wanted to get it out of the way. And so and I wanted people to kind of start at the beginning. And so the first episode is called In the Beginning. Let's look at the first dog, right? The wolf. So then the second episode right after that was dogs in history. So in the first episode, we started at the very beginning with wolves. And then in the second episode, we talked about how dogs came from wolves. And we focused specifically on North America and how did we even get dogs in North America?
I found that a very interesting episode. Marc Durr, the author you interviewed,
the Gandalf, the doggy Gandalf who lives in Miami Beach.
He clearly has like a passion and a deep source of knowledge, and he went through what I would consider sort of the anthropology or the anthrozoology of our relationships with dogs in the distant past. But in talking about what I would consider, I don't know, you wouldn't call it modern technically, but relatively recent history, so the last few hundred years in North America, I was surprised, and I had little inklings about this. I have not studied this, but I have heard, in passing mention of some of this kind of stuff. Some rather disturbing stories and disturbing and bloody truths about dogs in North America.
It was a tough call for me to do that, actually. I really debate. There's a lot of stuff in a lot of my conversations that I took that I had to edit out because I even had people tell me that they couldn't listen to the second episode or it was tough to listen to. And I knew it would be tough. But I'm not playing around. Like I'm not doing a podcast where we talk about puppies. I'm trying to figure out, I want to know what's out there. Cause there's really actually, believe it or not, there's not a whole lot we know about dogs. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to get this stuff out and I wanted to get this stuff documented. And, and as a military veteran, I talked about some pretty shitty stuff that military has done with dogs. And
I was curious for your take on that because in, the Victor writes history, my bastardization of that quote. But with your background, were you prepared to hear the non-romanticized version of this history?
Yeah. So, like I said, I got a late start in this dog game, and I felt like there were certain things that I had to do in order to kind of get caught up and to be able to say, I know and I understand. And when I was doing the school program at University of Washington, I was also looking at a lot of what was going on with the dogs in my community in the state of Washington in Pacific Northwest. And I noticed that there was this huge influx of dogs coming from Korea. There'd be a local news story. A plane load of dogs just got rescued from Korea and they're going to be in Seattle homes. And I was like, well, what is this all about? Why are we getting plane loads of dogs from Korea and then put into our adoption system locally? And keep in mind, many of these dogs that are coming from Korea are not house pets who are just being readopted. You know, these are animals that are in cages like chickens, you know, and they're butchered live often, especially during the festival season, where there's a festival that they eat dog.
That's the Yulon Meat Festival. Is that the one you're thinking
I believe
of?
so.
Or is that China?
I can't remember which one Yulon is, but I just know that the area that I was studying and looking at was Korea, the Korean meat dog or dog meat farms. And I had to know, I just had to know what was going on. And you know, I tell you what, man, I mean, in order to know more, I had to watch a lot of YouTube videos. And I tell you what, man, of all the stuff I've done and seen, those videos are still kind of burned in my brain. And I did it. I mean, I just felt like I had to do it. And there were classmates of mine that couldn't do it and wouldn't do it. And someone had to do it. And I feel better for it. Same thing with, you know, that same kind of a mentality was what made me do the second episode where we talked about that kind of heavier stuff. And I actually have remixed the episode. I'm going to be putting out some reruns of my shows. I'm going to be calling them kind of like remixes, where I've kind of better added more music and music cues and things to kind of soften the blow of the content that I'm delivering. But that was kind of my same approach with the Dogs in History episode. I knew Marc has been criticized for talking about this kind of stuff, the dark stuff, the real stuff that I believe has had an effect on our view of animals and dogs today. Look, when I was in Philly, and I noticed that there were lots of folks in my community, in my neighborhood, that were very fearful of dogs, very fearful. I mean, they'd see one coming down the street and they would just run to the other side of the street. I mean, I took a puppy into an Apple store one time in Philly and I thought the place was going to clear out. I remember I was on the bus going to Center City, or what many people refer to as downtown in Philly, Center City, Philadelphia. And a blind person came on with a seeing eye dog, and the dog was just super mellow and calm. And the bus nearly cleared out. People there was a panic. There was almost a rush out the bus. I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, what is this all about? And I'm talking to Marc. He goes, hey, man, it was not long ago that people were sicking dogs on protest marchers. And so if you're in in Philly, there is still people who fight pit bulls. Yep. So if you live in a community where maybe someone's fighting pit bull gets loose on the street, or your mom or your grandma had dogs suck on them because they were in a civil rights protest, yes, that does affect your view of animals and dogs today. If that's the culture if that's how how dogs have been used, you know, in your family's history, right? And I mean, I know I'm sounding intense about this, but this is why I wanted to do this show. I mean, I felt that there was stuff that needed to be said and explained, and it wasn't even stuff that I felt needed to be said. There was stuff that I felt I needed to learn, and I was just going to share what I've learned. And like I said, you know, there's stuff with Marc. There's stuff that Marc talked about that I didn't even release, and I don't know if I'm going to. I might, you know, with maybe a little more explicit warning. Same thing with Adam P. C.A.R.E, the law episode. I mean, he went into some pretty graphic cases that he's dealt with, and I chose not to air them. And if you listen to my show, really honestly, it's not that bad. I mean, I think maybe the second episode is probably the heavier, you know, and plus also the stuff we talk about in the second episode really did happen a long time ago. We're talking about Columbus and the New World and things like that. But, you know, there are certain things that make me nervous and I can get spooked easily. But if I'm serious about something, I'll do what I got to do. And if that means I got to watch YouTube videos of dogs getting butchered, or I've got to have Marc tell me, you know, the stuff that I learned about, or I've got to have Adam P. C.A.R.E tell me about the cases that he's dealt with, And in fact, he's the one who's dealt with them, and the animal control officers that I work with at the shelter, they see a lot of stuff, and they see a lot of stuff that a lot of people wouldn't be able to handle. And I think that the people who do have to deal with the stuff, the people who do go into the butcher farm and rescue the dogs, I think their story needs to be told. And it's not about talking about dogs. Yes, there are more important things than dogs in the world. I get it. But there aren't many people who are willing to do some of the things that I know people to do, and I think those people need to be honored. And the people who are trying to tell the public about those people need to be honored. And that was part of the purpose of my show.
And I think those would make some very good second season interviews. Just FYI.
And I mean, I have enough unaired interviews. I have so much leftovers from my interviews that I never use that I could probably do another 3 seasons and just pull sound. I mean, when I was at the Wolf Sanctuary for the first episode, Eric is very passionate about ending the crossbreeding of dogs and wolves. He is not cool with wolf dog hybrids because he's the one who has to live out there with these poor animals that are stuck between two worlds. They're too domesticated to be in the wild, and they're too wild to be in someone's home. So these poor dogs are stuck in this purgatory for the rest of their life, until they go and another one comes into the sanctuary because it can't go anywhere else. It can't survive anywhere else, And so Eric, he kept wanting to talk about wolf hybrids. And I kept saying, no, man, I'm here to learn about alpha. Tell me more about if this alpha thing is real. Like, what am I supposed to do about this alpha thing? And so I did tell him, I was like, hey, I owe it to Eric. I do owe Eric another episode where we can really talk to the public and try to educate the public about this whole wolf hybrid thing and how it's I don't see it as a humane thing. We have dogs.
Yeah.
Why do you need a wolf dog hybrid? I don't.
Well, I had an interview on that subject with someone from the Wolf Sanctuary, which I think is also out your way, in either Washington or maybe Colorado. And we went over the whole conversation of why do people want these?
Why do they
we could
want
talk
them?
for hours about that. Well, her opinion, that the woman I spoke with, her opinion was that it's a status thing. It's the conquering of nature and
coming from
bringing
Philly
it into the home.
and the East Coast, I can understand that. I mean, hey, my nephews and my brother live not very far at all from where Michael Vick, the football player, had his dogfighting ring.
Yeah.
It's real. This stuff is still out there. I don't think it really happens a whole lot out here in the Pacific Northwest. There might be some cockfighting or something, but there's in the South, the East Coast, Northeast, there's still a lot of this stuff going on. And a lot. I'm sorry, and I went off track, but it is about status. It makes you look tough. You're insecure. Big old mean pit bull makes you look tough, just like a gun. You fire a gun, the block clears. You have power. You walk down the street with a mean ass pit bull, you got power.
Yeah, it's something that comes up a lot is the role that dogs fulfill in our eyes and as parts of our personalities. And that segues beautifully into the next question.
And sorry to interrupt, but like Marc Durr essentially told me that the moral of what Marc Durr was trying to teach me, it wasn't just telling me gross and heavy stuff. There was a moral behind what he was telling me. And what he was trying to teach me was that dogs are what we make them, and they always have been, they always will be. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it's important to know about them and to understand them and to honor them, because they are what each individual person makes them out to be. And that can be a wide variety of things. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but continue.
No problem. But that still works into the segue. It's such a good segue. And I think this is telling of the way you set up these episodes. Dr. Stephen Hales, the professor of philosophy, when I saw you had a philosophy episode, I kind of went, because I'm like you, I think, and I find it interesting. And then it's kind of like, okay, let's move along. Philosophy, for those who have not, I think, learned how to communicate about philosophy or don't have the basis of understanding about philosophy, can very quickly become overwhelming.
I agree.
Or dull. And your interview was well done in that it covered off sort of some of those basic questions. And one of the things that came up, I think my favorite part, that sort of you kept circling around and coming to and touching in different formats, was not so much how we view dogs, because I think that came up in a lot of the other interviews, but the question of how do dogs view us? It's one of those sort of mind screws, which is not the actual term, but we're trying to keep it somewhat friendly. So it's, how did you interpret that as someone who is not a philosophy major? How was that conversation for you? And why does it matter? I think is maybe sort of the secondary part of that.
Well, some of these episodes, like I said, I wanted to kind of learn about a general subject by using dogs as a fulcrum, as kind of a focus. I've always been interested in philosophy, but I have always kind of found it overwhelming. It seems, I just wanted, not only did I want to better understand just kind of the core concepts of philosophy, basically Philosophy 101, I wanted the episode to kind of be a Philosophy 101 where I could take the audience through, if they had never taken a philosophy class, if it was just kind of philosophy was just a word to them, if you were to take philosophy class, what would you learn about? And that's what I kind of delivered and how we did it. But also, dogs and philosophy is kind of all over the news. I mean, there was a year or two ago where every outlet, like Huffington Post, everybody, the big news story was, do dogs feel guilty? And that was just another one of those big kind of can of worms that a lot of people seem to have very passionate opinions on. It's like, no, my dog knows when he does something wrong. He knows he does something wrong. I could see it in his eyes. He knows. And then other people are saying, no, that's the reaction that he's done out of defense or whatever. And, and it's much more scientific than that. And so it was again where I wanted to not only learn about the greater subject of philosophy, just like I learned about law or whatever. I wanted to go to someone who really would know the answer to these debates, or try to give me the answer to these debates. Not just the answer, but insight. Of course, a philosophy professor is never really going to tell you anything. They're just going to leave you with more questions, which I was fine with. But at least I got to explore this stuff. It's like, hey, Dr. Hales. Yeah. Does your dog feel guilty? Like, if anybody would know, it would be you, and he was like, well, sense of self, and we really don't know. And, but why, you asked, why is it important? Why would people want to know how dogs view us? I mean,
well, not only why do they want to know, but why is it important that we ask the question, I think?
For one, I think it'd just be cool to know. I mean, when I was a kid, my grandma had a little Yorkshire Terrier and a Cocker Spaniel, and I just remember as a kid thinking about how cool it would be if the dog could talk. Like, what is he thinking? Like, what would he talk about? Like, would he tell me he's bored of eating the same food every day? Like, I'm really interested in how dogs think. I mean, I do appreciate the mystery. I think that's one of the things that makes me so fascinated and wanting to learn more, is because there is kind of a mystery that needs to be decoded about dogs, because they can't speak. They can't verbalize how they're feeling, right? And if you spend enough time around dogs and you learn about dog behavior and canine behavior and things like that, you eventually actually do learn how to listen to them a little bit more. But I think that, if we knew how dogs viewed us, Julie Forbes in the leadership episode, when she was teaching me about leadership and what dogs can teach us about leadership and how we can be better leaders by learning from dogs, she said, there's this big common misconception that many people have about their dog, and that is that their dog loves to please. My dog just exists to please me, right? And she says, your dog actually does what's best for them. Like, they're sitting because they want the treat, or they're sitting because they want your praise. They want your attention and your affection, just like we desire that from other people. And so I think that some of these people who think that, my dog exists to please me, I think maybe some of them would be a little surprised if they really knew how their dog viewed them. Do our dogs just view us as a source of resources, or an access to, are we just access to resources to them? Do they truly love us? What is love? Are they our friend? What is friendship? what is friendship? Can it be a different kind of friendship than we have with people? Do they see us as their friend? I think it's different for everybody. I think everybody's idea of that is different and opinions on that are different. But I just find myself asking these questions almost like I am a philosopher, but I know I'm not. I know I'm not. I never will be. But I can now understand. Dogs have now made me understand what it's like to question big questions that are unanswerable, but that doesn't make you want to have the answer any less. I know what I'm saying doesn't make any sense, and I know I'm probably the worst interview you've ever had, but I've never had anybody want to let me just talk about dogs. It's like,
well, and that's one of the fun things about the podcast format is we can go on and on and on. And it is interesting though, because I've done a bit of reading from different sources. Temple Grandin, I've read some of her writing. Dr. Marc Bekoff.
He's great. If I do another season, he's definitely, he was on the list for the first season. I just had so many other things I wanted to get through. But yeah, Marc Durr really wants me to interview him. Actually, I think Marc Durr emailed Bekoff. I don't know. Marc Durr was trying to get me hooked up with Bekoff, and I will. In some way, I'm definitely going to, I got to learn from that guy, and I know he has a lot to teach me. Yeah. Yeah, continue.
Oh, he's incredible. Your brain just kind of melts and he puts parts of it back together. And Jeanne Donaldson, Academy of Dog Trainers, who's done a couple of big books. And they all have very similar ways of looking at it, but I find they ask slightly different questions. And that's what I find fascinating, is they're all trying to get around the same thing. So, you ask, Jeanne Donaldson talks about dogs being, as you sort of the way you were describing, sort of selfish. And they're going to do what's best for them.
Same with us.
First. And I think we do very similar things. And then Marc Bekoff will talk about how dogs will feel, and they may feel emotions that we could label the same way as we feel them, but they're going to be felt differently because they are different. And that doesn't mean they're less. They're just different. But it's very interesting. And I want to talk about the Temple Grandin episode.
Oh, awesome. That was a trip, man. That was literally a trip. I actually had to get on a boat. She's a bit of a divisive figure in the animal rights world. And again, my eyes were open to so many things that I never even knew. I didn't realize. I thought that Temple Grandin was like this, this beloved on a pedestal person, and in many ways she is, and she is a wonderful person, and she is great, and she has done a lot of great things. But then, of course, like I said, everybody disagrees with everybody. That was one of the reasons why I did the final episode with the science and trying to just kind of again try to get objective with things. But I had I had guests who write me and say, "Are you going to be doing a softball thing like you did with me, or are you going to talk to her about this? You're going to talk to her about that?" I'm just like, "No, I gave you a softball. I'm going to give her a softball, man. I just want to learn the stuff that she wants to teach me, And somebody, someone threw her hard balls from the audience. And I was like, this is a thing,
Yeah, and it's she typically handles it well. I mean, that's you can agree with her or disagree with her, but she is an incredibly intelligent woman who's accomplished a great deal in her life.
Absolutely.
And is a wonderful. She's written some wonderful things that I greatly enjoyed reading and has interesting perspectives. What was the experience like for you? I've got kind of two parts to this. What was the experience like? As you said, you had to go to an island and sit down from her, and she is something of a larger than life character.
Yeah, I was intimidated. I was nervous.
So what was that experience like? And then I also want to ask your decision to do the unedited interview as the post.
Oh, that's because I can only get 25 minutes with her, as opposed to like the 2 or 3 hours that I'll sometimes spend with other guests.
Okay, so there was a very straightforward for that. So what was it like though, sitting down across from her? I mean, you sit down, and there's Temple Grandin. I've
sat down in front of world leaders. I've sat down in front of rock stars. I mean, I've toured with rock stars. I've met very powerful people. In the military, I'm interviewing, commanders of fleets, and I documented when the First Lady of Iceland passed away when I was there in 1998, and I've covered some really big stories and I've met some really great people. But I think Temple Grandin is one of the greatest people I've ever met. And I was starstruck. I was so funny. Like after all these cool people I've met, all these famous people I've met, and hung out with. Like, I was starstruck in front of Dr. Grandin. So it all started, she was kind of on my dream list before I started the show. I was like, if there's one person I could try to talk to, if I could, it would be her, or learn from, I should say. And then I found out she was coming to Vashon Island. And she says, okay, if you can meet me, she said she didn't want to leave the venue. When she gets to a town, when she gets to a venue, she doesn't really want to like leave the venue. And I can understand that as someone who's the tour manager for bands. I'd always tell people, if you want to interview the band, you got to come to the show. You got to come to the venue. I don't want my band driving all over town when they've got a show to do or whatever. And I agreed to that. I said, no problem. But I also knew like it was a pretty crazy day. And she was like, just find me at the event and we'll do it. And I'm like, no, you're Temple Grandin on an island in the Pacific Northwest. You're like a god out here. Like people, she has a fan base similar to how rock stars have a fan base. And when she comes to town to do a little theater chat with the local residents, like she's going to be a rock star. So I was like, I wrote her people back and I was like, with all due respect, like that is not an option. Like there's no way I can assume that I'll just be able to grab you when you're surrounded by people trying to get your picture or whatever and say, let's go do an hour interview right now. I was like, we got to plan something a little bit better. So her people were like, I think I was emailing her staff and then she started emailing me directly. And she goes, okay, well, we'll do it at the venue, but we'll meet a couple hours before doors open or whatever. And we'll do it then. I was like, okay, great. But I was like, it's a ferry ride away. I don't want anything to happen. I do not want to risk a car breaking down, the boat filling up and me not getting on it in time. So I said, I'm going to have to rent a place on this island for the weekend that she's there, and so I rented this amazing Airbnb that was very close, like less than a mile from the venue on the island. And I got all my gear out there and I actually made a little fun trip out of it and had some friends from out of town come and hang out at this vacation rental with me. And so the day of the interview, so she flies in to SeaTac. I think she went right from the airport right onto the ferry. And, she's probably exhausted, flying all morning. And I meet her at the venue. Well, I didn't realize that her event was the second event that the venue had planned. So she was the evening event. I didn't realize that during the day there was a children's play. It was like... It was, what was it? Tinkerbell and all that. Daggone it. Yeah, Peter Pan. So there's like a children's production of Peter Pan. So there's like kids running around everywhere. They've got the audio from the stage pumped into all of the house speakers, like in the lobby and everything. And there's like parents all over the place and cars coming in and out. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm supposed to interview Temple Grandin like right now in this place. She's coming from the airport. She's on the boat right now. I was like, what am I going to do? There's not one quiet room in the place. And the staff was trying to accommodate me and like, well, there's like a closet over here and a kitchen. And no matter where I went, the walls were you could hear everything out from the stage. So sure enough, Temple Grandin and Julie Forbes, who I just interviewed for the leadership episode. Julie Forbes is actually the one who booked Temple Grandin to come to Vashon Island. And so Julie Forbes, who I'm trying to be cool in front of because, she was one of my guests, just, rolls into the theater with Temple Grandin. And Temple Grandin, she's all dudded up. She's got her, what is it, the bolo tie and the ranch shirt and jeans and everything. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm about to meet someone who, I admire so much. And then also tell them that I don't know what to do. like, oh my God. And I didn't want her to like say, okay, well, I'll just go back to the hotel. This is my window. So thank God I had rented that cabin or that vacation rental. Thank God I'd rented that cabin because there's no way she was going to get back on that boat and go into Seattle. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so, because she had a speaking engagement to do in a couple hours. And so I said, Dr. Grandin, I can't do, and we can't do this interview in the venue. And I know you don't want to leave the venue. And I know we agreed that we would only do the interview. If we did it, it would be in the venue. I was like, but I've got this vacation rental. It's less than a mile away. I promise. And in my head, I'm like, this lady thinks I'm going to kidnap her. She just flew in and I'm like, get in my car. Let's take you to my house. I've rented the cabin in the island for you. And she looks at And she looks at Julie, and Julie's like, well, we could if we could do it fast, if we do it quick, I've got to get her booked into the hotel, and she's got a big day ahead of her. I'm like, yes. And Julie's like, did you even tell me that you were going to be doing that? I was like, I did. I swear to God, I told you, And Dr. Grandin was so nice and just so accommodating, and she got in my car, and my buddy drove us back to the vacation rental, and I've got all my gear in like a Pelican case. Thank God I have everything's very portable. And so I was like, Travis, help me, man. Travis is my friend and roommate, and he also produces music for the show. And I was like, help me. Come on, we got to get this set up like right now. And he's like, boom, just like, he's done a lot of touring with bands and stuff. So he just like got right into stage mode and just started give me a power drop, run me another line, and he's just like, he just basically like constructed a radio, station, in like 10 seconds in this cabin. And Dr. Grandin, and by the time Dr. Grandin got done going over her notes and going over the questions, we were ready to record, and she just, I hit record, and she just, boom, lit up. Just did her thing. Like, she just knew what she was going to say. She'd set up, many things, of course, she'd said before, but this is what she wanted me to know, and she kept it on dogs, which is kind of her to really kind of stay focused on dogs. And I know livestock is kind of her thing. And she just lectured to me. I just hit roll, and I just sat back, and she just lectured to me. I got lectured to by Temple Grandin, and I was able to get, and Julie Forbes was so nice as to stand in the back of the kitchen, and just like, she's like, man, I had so many plans for this lady right now. Like, this guy totally just ambushed me, man. And she was so kind enough to accommodate me too. And it was like, I think really the duration of our conversation is the duration of the episode pretty much. Like 25 minutes or whatever, and boom, done. Thank you so much. Drove her back to the venue where the play was wrapping up, and I got to hang out with Temple Grandin, just me and a couple friends in a cabin on an island. Like, I don't know, like, there's really not, like, I've really done some pretty amazing stuff in my life. Like, this project, just not only did I achieve any of the goals that I had before starting this podcast, just there's experiences that I got to step back from and now look at and be like, I never even thought that would have been possible. I never even would have imagined that this project would have taken me to, a sanctuary where I'm surrounded by wolves, or hanging out in a cabin with Temple Grandin. I don't know. I think I have the greatest dog podcast ever. Sorry.
To listen to Dogs in Our World, visit dogsinOurworld.com. or search for Dogs in Our World on iTunes, Stitcher, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts.
To learn more about the Furbearers, go to Furbearers.com. Subscribe to the Defender Radio podcast hosted by Michael Howie. It's available anywhere you can find podcasts. Of course, we'll provide links to all their stuff in the show notes. And thank you. Thank you so much to Defender Radio for having me on their show. It was cool, and I appreciate it. Maybe you understand a bit more about me and why I needed to create Dogs in Our World. Speaking of, I really love getting messages from listeners, and I have a specific question for you. I'm super curious what you think of the format of this show. Do you like that more kind of documentary style that I did in the first season? Or do you prefer the more elongated and free-form conversation like what you heard in this best bonus episode, like how Michael Howie just kind of lets it roll? Maybe you like a little bit of both, kind of like with the last episode with Dr. James Ha. Seriously, I'm curious. What's your podcast style preference? Let me know over at dogsinOurworld.com or any of our social media. All right? Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Hey, Adam here. Don't forget, I'm always looking for opportunities to improve the relationships between people and their dogs. I also love talking to groups about dogs in our world, so check out my services page at dogsinOurworld.com to see how you can pick my brain about dogs from anywhere in the world. Seattle area residents, you can hire me to come to your home and talk about your dog. No matter where you live, I want to help you with a dog challenge or personally share ideas, tips, and tricks that will improve your dog's relationship with you. I especially love teaching people how to provide their dogs with basic training and exploring ways to improve your relationship with them. So for a limited time, new pet parents will receive a 20% discount on in-home training if you give me a message from dogsinourworld.com and have me come straight to your house. All right? If you have a group or business, please hire me to come talk about what the dogs in our world can teach us. I want to talk to businesses about how dogs can teach us to be better leaders. I want to talk to new pet groomers about animal behavior. And I want to talk to animal shelters about dogs. I guarantee you, no matter what your group, I have something valuable to share. All right? So check out my services page and see how I can help you, your dog, or your group. All right? I'll talk to you soon.